Ever since the mid-1990s, online multiplayer gaming has been a popular trend of its time. I mean, while it was fun socializing with your friends and duking it out in a LAN party environment, dialing up to your internet service provider or an online subscription-based gaming service was considered to be more convenient. Just dial up and play. Somewhat simple. Unless your game gets suddenly interrupted by a phone call. Anyway, you might have read the title thinking, what's so unhinged about Blood's multiplayer? In this video, I will try to explain just that. Now, for those who don't know, Blood is a 1997 first-person shooter game, developed originally by a subdivision from Apogee Software named Apogee West, but it was later renamed to Q Studios and then later merged with Monolith Productions by the time the game was nearly complete. The game was also made under Ken Silverman's build engine alongside Duke Nukem 3D and Shadow Warrior. But unlike the two build engine games, Blood was kinda most different, engine-wise, as far as I can recall. The developers pretty much disliked working with Ken's build engine, so they pretty much had to work on certain things to their liking. This includes the map format as well, but that's a whole nother can of worms in itself. Just like Duke Nukem and Shadow Warrior, Blood was also advertised for multiplayer gaming over at services like the Total Entertainment Network, otherwise known as 10. It's also worth mentioning that the game was also supported on other services at the time like Dwango, Kali, Heat.net, and even MPlayer from Empath Interactive. Obviously, I wasn't around when this game was being played on these multiplayer services back then, because by the time I got into computers, we were in the Windows XP era. Now, of course, since the services are no longer functional and many computers shifted away from MS-DOS, it was looking like that Blood in its multiplayer was starting to fade into obscurity. This was until dedicated fans started to come up with ways to play the game on modern hardware. A guide was written on deathmask.net detailing how to get build engine games working under Windows XP, with basic IPX protocol support. And programs like Hamachi could route players into a match since it's trying to emulate a LAN network. Now, this method was soon obsolete by the time an emulator named DOSBox was starting to become more fleshed out and supported IPX tunneling, allowing users to emulate the game in its multiplayer. As for the game itself, it received a cult following as evidenced by the amount of YouTube videos released back in the mid to late 2000s. I only found out about this game while browsing on YouTube only to see the game's cutscenes. Now, fast forward into 2011, I found out about the multiplayer scene and decided to try Blood multiplayer myself. Before we get any further on the retrospective, let's just talk about how Blood's multiplayer is like. Starting off, Blood has the usual game types, or game modes, whatever you want to call it, of cooperative and deathmatch. Just like Duke with their Duke matches and Shadow Warrior with their Wang Bangs.
Damn, dude.
Blood has its own name in the form of Bloodbath. However, Blood has another game type in the form of teams, but more on that later. Just like in the single player, players usually start off with a pitchfork and must search for weapons. So let's talk about the arsenal and its usefulness for multiplayer. While the flare pistol's primary fire isn't really too useful against players, with at least 8 flares, the alternative fire is proven to be very effective as it causes an explosion, and also setting the opponent on fire for a little bit longer, if they ever survive the explosion, that is. But however, I think it depends on the range. The further it is, the more wider the spread is. Of course, the sawed-off shotgun serves as the game's workhorse weapon, even in single player. While the primary fire is more useful for long range, the alternative fire shoots out 2 shotgun shells, inflicting more damage to the opponent, given they're in the mid to close range. That's where it's most effective. Think of it as a combination between the regular shotgun and the double-barreled shotgun from Doom 2, and you get what I mean. Now, the Tommy gun I have not used very often, but it is an annoyance to some once somebody starts crouching while firing at an opponent because it makes them hard to hit. Which reminds me, there's another thing about Blood that I like, and that would be how fluid the movement tends to be compared to the other build engine games. allowing players to crouch while in midair and even using the explosives to reach higher platforms. It is something that I really like about the game, and it's almost like as if it were a build engine Quake in terms of mechanics. Anyway, the napalm launcher is kind of self-explanatory, but think of it as a rocket launcher with the splash damage, setting your opponents on fire for a bit upon impact. But I will add that ever since the release of the Plasma Pack, there was an alternative fire for the napalm. Now, I do not use it very often, but I can see some potential for a decent area of denial weapon, at a cost of plenty of ammo. The TNT, or dynamite, is also a fun weapon to play with at times. It's kinda similar to Quake 2's grenades when you just basically throw it at somebody and watch them explode upon impact. Even funnier is when you get to the remote and proximity mines, as you can plant a lot of remote detonators before tossing in a few or more proximity mines can create a very loud explosion. I noticed one of the recent Age of Empires 2...
Oh my god. Oh my god, I just got ear raped by so many prox mines. Holy shit.
I could also recall that there was a way to crash the game by planting way too many of those as well. The spray can isn't really useful unless you use the alternative fire, where you just light the can on fire and throw it at your opponent, giving your opponents a good burn for a little while. The Tesla cannon acts similar to the plasma rifle from Doom, but from what I've heard in the past, this weapon kinda tends to be underused. But I do believe there is good potential for that weapon if you use the alternative fire. What it does is it charges up and fires a wave of electricity that really obliterates players when near it. Even yourself if you're not careful. But it also makes for a funny from the grave moment if you think about it. The life leech tends to set opponents on fire more longer than the flare pistol and spray can combined. But the alternative fire makes for a funny or interesting stationary turret. At times I just use the alternative fire to reach to higher platforms and outsmart my opponents.
Okay. How'd you get up there so fast? I literally saw you.
Lastly, the Voodoo Doll's primary fire is decent, but what's even more effective is the alternative fire, where you basically just kill your opponent you have your sights on. Kind of similar to the BFG 9000 in my opinion, just without the giant green plasma ball that obliterates a player and just only has the tracers. Alright, enough of that. Here are some more interesting parts about the multiplayer. The game itself is pretty much just chaotic in nature, especially when you have some of your opponents entering a state before death, where you can just finish them off Mortal Kombat style. Based on my experience, you can try to come up with various but creative ways to finish your opponent off. Of course, for starters, you can just use a pitchfork or a shotgun blast, but you could even throw some dynamite or a spray can as well. But if your opponent is one of those people that try to revive themselves by tapping the use key, you could even troll them by shotgun blasting them into the air, and pull off some mid-air kills by doing so. Or you could just crouch and push them to their deaths. It's really brutal and I like it. Now, whenever I hear about team play, I think about Team Deathmatch, of course. But what also reminds me about team play is a game type known as Capture the Flag. Of course, the mode is kind of self-explanatory. The players are divided into teams, red and blue, and their goal is to steal the opposing team's flag and bring it to their base to score. This was originally a traditional outdoor game, but the difference between that and a first-person shooter video game is that only your weapons could have a role in how the match plays out. Now in Blood, you would have a game type called Teams, where it combines the concepts of Team Deathmatch and Capture the Flag all together. On the top of the screen represents each team's score. You get points by killing somebody from the enemy team, but you could also lose some points by killing your teammates. Or you could just simply steal their flag and return it to your base. However, one interesting thing about this game type is that when you're trying to return your flag, you have to actually bring it to your base. This allows people to not only go after the base that has the flag, but also the person that is carrying the flag as well. You could also take both teams' flags and pretty much just score and return at the same time. This makes for some interesting but unhinged team play sessions. Not to mention that many of the stock levels also have support for teams, but the flags are placed in varying areas. In the case of Area 15, a Plasma Pack exclusive Bloodbath level, one flag is where the Voodoo Doll is at and the other is at the area where the Tesla Cannon's at. Almost where you can just get the napalm launcher under the bridge. Now, even if the map itself doesn't have the predefined location for the flags, you could still just treat it as a team bloodbath at the end of the day. As for my retrospective of Blood multiplayer, I wanted to try it out myself one day, so I remember grabbing Yang, which stands for Yet Another Network Guider. I believed it was mostly used for Duke Nukem 3D, but it supported the other games as well. Though, in the case of Duke Nukem 3D, they used a source port called X-Duke. As for Yang, sadly I did not use it very often because it lacked a chatting system, and you have to be patient enough to be lucky if somebody entered your lobby. But that was when I discovered another alternative called Meltdown. It was another network guider that had these features that I wanted. It was this service that I got my fix of Blood multiplayer. Though I played it on and off at the time, but nowadays Meltdown is labeled as a malware, and everyone stopped using it, of course. It was weird looking back when I first heard about the news because that was like days after I joined the DOSBox Deathmatch Club. It's a shame because I made some friends and enemies, but at this point it's just best to move on to better services. Like, if you want to play Blood multiplayer nowadays, there are some ways. My go-to method is through Classic Gaming Arena, which allows players to play Blood multiplayer both on DOSBox and native hardware. So you can finally dust out your Pentium machines and play Blood multiplayer like it was 1997. Well, except you were on some cable internet and not on dial-up. Now, if you just want to use source ports and play it on modern native hardware, you could just grab source ports like InBlood and NotBlood. You could either play it with a direct IP address or use some service like NukemNet, but that's for another video in itself. Though, maybe after I make a video about Classic Gaming Arena. But anyways, that's about it for this video. If you like what you saw and want to try it out for yourself, I will provide links in the description down below. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and as always, peace out.